Do you love books but don't have time to read them? Do you wish you could listen to your favorite stories while driving, working out, or doing chores? If so, you need Audible, the world's largest library of audiobooks and podcasts. With Audible, you can enjoy unlimited access to thousands of titles across genres and categories from bestsellers to classics, thrillers, romance, fiction, and nonfiction. You can also discover new and exclusive content from Audible Originals, featuring original stories and performances by celebrities and authors. Plus, you can download your audiobooks and podcasts offline for listening anywhere, anytime, on any device. And with Audible Plus, you can get even more benefits, such as unlimited listening to select audiobooks and podcasts, free exchanges and returns, and a 30-day free trial. So what are you waiting for? Join Audible today and start your listening adventure. Visit the show notes to support the show and get your free Audible trial today. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, what's your favorite early performance from an actor who would go on to be a big star?
My answer is actually one that people don't necessarily think about. I mean, a lot of times, I think when I first looked at this question, I was thinking about people I had seen in my lifetime and like knew they were going to be a big star. But in actuality, when I think about it, my favorite example of this is somebody who it goes back to the earliest days of cinema. It's Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton got his start appearing as like second fiddle in Fatty Arbuckle films. And, you know, those films are all about Fatty Arbuckle. But there was a film early on called Coney Island that Fatty Arbuckle does with Buster. They shot on location. And Buster's playing very much against type. You know, he's, as we know, the sad sack put upon character who nothing works out for. In this film, he is the romantic rival to Fatty Arbuckle, right? Like he's the one that Fatty is in opposition to in a Fatty Arbuckle short. But Buster is so incredible in Coney Island. He's so funny with what little he has to do in that as a secondary role that he kind of outshines Fatty Arbuckle in that film to me. So when you look at Coney Island, you really get the sense of like, oh, even though this guy was not a marquee name at this point, especially in those early days of silent comedy shorts, there's just something about Buster Keaton that you just feel it in that movie. And obviously, he would go on to be one of the formative silent film stars.
So my pick, I made a kind of a long list, honestly, just thinking about this, and there's a lot of good choices. But one kind of just stuck out to me once I landed on it, and it's kind of twofold because it's their first performance, the first movie they've ever been in. They were on TV beforehand, but this is their first movie, and it's crazy that this is their first movie, that this is their first performance, and it's a fully formed, almost like Kirk Douglas in Out of the Past, where you just go, oh, they just know what they are immediately. And it's even crazier when you realize that this actor is 21 years old. It is Eddie Murphy in 48 Hours. I mean, that is, it's just, Eddie Murphy is probably the biggest star of the 80s. One of the biggest stars of the 90s, even though his quality control is not as high as it was in the 80s. He's still a megastar today because of the work he did in the 80s and 90s. And it's all because, and it all started here. And he knew exactly what he was in 1982 at the ripe old age of 21. It's insane that he's going up against Nick Nolte at this point, a pretty grizzled vet. And he's being directed by Walter Hill, one of the leanest, meanest B-movie auteurs of all time. And he steals the movie out from under Nick Nolte, James Remar, David Michael Kelly. It's just astonishing, and that this is it. Like, he did SNL for a year or two before this, and he does this. It's astounding. I really don't know if there's a better first performance from someone based on what their career would be than Eddie Murphy in 48 Hours. It's crazy how good he is in this and what it signals to come.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, Producer and screenwriter Michael H. Weber joins us for a discussion of the 1947 noir film Out of the Past.
Our guest today is a screenwriter who co-wrote with Scott Neustadter the films 500 Days of Summer, The Spectacular Now, and The Disaster Artist. Michael H. Weber joins us on the show. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome. We're happy to have you. Very excited to have you. This is one I've been looking forward to, not just for you being a guest, but as the resident Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas super fan. As I don't know if you noticed this, if you've ever seen Night of the Hunter.
Yes, of course. Wow.
I've got
That's
the Night of the
amazing.
Hunter finger tattoos. So this is just a big day for me all around.
That's Spike Lee's favorite movie, right? That's what I'm told. Is that true? Have you heard that?
I don't know if I ever saw him say it's his favorite film. He obviously has to love it if he gave that whole thing to Radio Raheem and Do the Right Thing.
Well, now you have to meet him and show him that.
I don't think. Look, okay, the audience can't see me. If Spike Lee ever saw me from like 2 blocks away, he would run in the other direction, thinking I'm still mad about the ending of Do the Right Thing.
Tom walks up and Spike goes, "This guy's got opinions on Summer of Sam."
This guy did not get a call back as an extra in Black Klansman, and he is mad.
But we're so thrilled to have you. This is so cool. We've been trying to do this for a while. You know, I met you very briefly years ago outside of the George Lucas talk show.
I mean, that was probably a decade ago. They were in the early days of that show. That show's now become a phenomenon.
Yeah, an online sensation. But I very briefly said, like, I'm a fan of your work outside the theater, and then years later, I DM you on Twitter, and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember us talking, and you were very kind enough to lie and say you did. We tried to do something in season 2, then we had this set up for season 3. Some illnesses got in the way, a bunch of things got in the way, but all along the way, you have been so gracious and so kind to try and make this work, and I really appreciate that, but that means I should come clean now and let you know, now that we've got you here, this is not NPR, and I am not Leonard Lopate. That's just what I said to get you here. It is not true.
I gotta call my agent. This is unbelievable.
Listen, it's a mistake a lot of people make, so don't feel bad.
Yeah.
They just assume Mike is someone who is like lives in the closets of NPR.
Yeah, that's true.
Headquarters.
Much like Leonard Lopate, people hear my voice, and if they're under 30, go, "Why am I listening to this? I'm gonna find something. Got to be some music on or something." Michael, thank you. This is so cool. We're huge fans. We're so glad you could come here, and we're so excited to talk about Out of the Past. You were talking before we got on, Mike, about how much you love Patton, and you said, "Oh, well, you wouldn't think based on my work or things like that, But at the end of the day, you're a screenwriter, and when you look at something, whether it's Patton or Out of the Past, these are movies that you look at and go, man, that script is airtight at times. Like, that is just, everybody looks at that and goes, I wish I could have written something that clean and simple, right?
I love Out of the Past. I'm holding it up for you guys. This is a podcast, and I own it on Blu-ray. I love this movie. I've seen it many times. Do not ask me to describe the plot. I could probably see this movie 50 times and not be able to fully walk you through the whole plot. And maybe at some point we'll talk about, does it even matter if the plot fully makes sense? But the script is great. I mean, the dialogue is incredible. It's so quotable. I mean, the performances are wonderful. It's really, a movie you can revisit over and over again and just discover new favorite moments and lines. And it's nothing like what I write. I'm one of those people, I have TCM on in the background, the same way some people have on the news or the Weather Channel or whatever. I've turned it off for the sake of our audio recording. I have TCM on all day long. And whenever Out of the Past comes on, I'm like, I have to stop what I'm doing, and I just get sucked in. So,
well, isn't that always the funniest thing about when you talk to any creative person, where like the things they make are never like the things that are their favorite things to watch? It's always like, oh yeah, when Wally Fish was like, oh yeah, Nolan, he's the biggest Michael Bay fan in the world, and you're like, what? How is this stuffy British man who will install a 70mm camera in your house if you don't look at him long enough, like a Dalek?
But we're so excited to talk about Out of the Past, and it's one of these. I mean, it's not just a great noir film; it's also the cast is packed with some of the Titanic Hollywood figures, right? Like just some, you've got Robert Mitchum, you've got Kirk Douglas, both early on in their careers.
But I think Mitchum, if I remember correctly, Mitchum had already been nominated for an Academy
Yes,
Award.
for the story of G.I. Joe.
He'd been celebrated where, I mean, this was what, Kirk Douglas's second or third movie? I mean,
second film, yeah.
Which
This
you
is
wouldn't
his
know,
coming out party.
Yeah.
but you wouldn't know, like, you watch this and it seems like the Kirk Douglas sort of persona, like it's kind of all there already in a way.
He's fully formed. Yeah,
Right.
It's crazy.
Exactly. Like you wouldn't know. You can watch someone's second or third picture and be like, oh yeah, they're kind of still figuring out their thing, even of this era where he's clearly, you would have no idea unless they told you that oh, this was really early for him.
Yeah, the only time you have people come on screen like fully formed around this time, I would say, or like if there's somebody who had a long career in vaudeville before that or something like that. Like W.C. Fields or Jimmy Durante, by the time they come on screen, they've already figured out what they are. But in terms of like the movie star, you're right. Like it's wild that Kirk Douglas has already figured out who Kirk Douglas is by the time he's on screen.
When you rewatch this with the lens of Kirk Douglas wasn't yet a star, you can kind of see there are some moments where you're like, oh, I feel like 5 or 10 movies from now, that line would have been delivered in close up.
Yeah.
Or there'd be a little more like he's sharing the frame a little more. Like once you know he's not a star yet, you could see it's directed a little differently, the scenes he's in, because it's not the same like, all right, we got to get, here's Kirk's line coming up. We got to really like hammer this in. Sort of the gravity of the movie is still around Robert Mitchum and Jane Greer, even though Kirk Douglas is stealing scenes that he's in.
Oh, Kirk Douglas this is a highway robbery that he performs in this movie. Like you said, his second movie, and this feels like you'd see he'd be doing this performance. Like you watch movies, he does the next 100 years he acts after this, and it's still like, oh, he's just been this guy from the beginning. It's wild. Like you watch this, you watch The Fury, you watch whatever, and you're just like, oh. It's very easy to see why this guy became like the biggest star in the world for like until his son became the biggest star in the world, And I mean, this wasn't my first Kirk Douglas movie I saw, but like this is another example of why he's my favorite actor of this era.
Oh,
like
wow.
even more than like Mitchum, and I love Mitchum, but like Kirk Douglas, man, he's like Clint Eastwood to me, where I could watch him in anything, and even if the movie's not great, it's like, well, he's in it, so I can still watch it. It's never like torture to watch a movie that he's in.
So do you have a favorite Kirk Douglas performance and a favorite Kirk Douglas movie? I mean, they might not be the same movie, which is why I'm so
they're not the same. My favorite Kirk Douglas performance is the movie Champion, where he plays the boxer. It's almost like proto Raging Bull, which is amazing, and he's like giving an almost De Niro-esque performance in that. But my favorite is Paths of Glory. Favorite movie he did was Paths of Glory. That's my favorite Kubrick movie. So that's just like a Titanic like thing. And I love Spartacus too, but I honestly, like, I would be hard pressed to like find a Kirk Douglas performance or movie I don't like. He just knew how to pick them, and he had the goods to back it up, which is crazy that he didn't learn it over time. He just did it. He just knew.
Now, Michael, you said Paths of Glory is your favorite Kirk Douglas movie too?
Yes.
Cool. So, Kyle, once we wrap this episode, we're just going to hang out an extra 2 hours, and we're going to crank out season 4's Paths of Glory movie, like back to back. We'll just get it done. We'll knock them out.
Let's do it.
With Mitchum, though, I think the thing that's interesting and why I say early in his career is I think when I look at Robert Mitchum around this time, because he has Crossfire this same year that goes on to win the Palme d'Or and the Best Picture nominations and all. But the thing I think that's interesting about Mitchum is I feel like this is the transitional point for Mitchum where a little before this time, it's akin to my partner and I were just watching Morocco the other day, right? Which is Gary Cooper in Morocco. Gary Cooper at a time around like the Morocco Design for Living era where, yes, he's an actor who's getting lead roles, but the tools in the Gary Cooper tool belt haven't all been fully formed yet, right? Like the Gary Cooper that from High Noon and Pride of the Yankees and all of that. The Gary Cooper that you can kind of spoof and parody or whatever hasn't fully. He's still got a bit more. I don't want to say range in a positive or a negative sense, but just like they haven't quite figured out what a Gary Cooper movie is yet. And when you look at this 1-2 punch of Crossfire and Out of the Past, you're like, oh, this is Robert Mitchum's thing. Like, this is the lane that we're going to launch all the way through to like Friends of Eddie Coyle and all of that. Like, I think this is where you start to figure out like, oh, this is where this guy's, this is how you use this tool the best way you can. You
and
know?
what's interesting is I read somewhere he wasn't the first choice.
No,
right? They went to Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah.
And Bogart, for whatever reason, I couldn't find, but Bogart passed on this. And then I'm not even sure if Mitchum was the second choice, but it's hard to imagine anyone else in this role.
Yeah, that is hard. And like, as much as I love Bogart, and I'm sure we all love Bogart, I feel like he's just got the wrong energy for this role. You know, I feel like, all right, so like, not to jump ahead to the end, but like, what I love about the end is that it could be read in multiple ways. If he actually was going off with the girl before he gets gunned down or not, but it leaves you with this option of like, maybe he told the kid to tell her that he did it to let her off the hook, giving him kind of like a nobility in his failure to succeed in his goals or whatever. Bogart brings such like a kind of sleaziness to it. You know, he's always like, you watch Maltese Falcon and you're like, yeah, this guy's kind of a shithead. You watch Treasure of the Sierra Madre, he's kind of more of a lowlife than Mitchum. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
That's
like, just
hearing. I would say the opposite.
Really?
I think that Bogart, and maybe that's just me thinking of Bogart like pre his noir days, like when he's in playing upper crust in Dark Victory. Because in Dark Victory, they cast Bogart and Ronald Reagan to play Betty Davis's two like white collar country club friends. And I do think the thing about Bogart that's interesting, for as much as he's known for playing like the down and dirty noir guys, because he was an actor who knew he could do more, were it not for his general tough guy vibe, with Bogart, you always feel this sense of, if polite society could accept him, he would move in those worlds, right? Like, even the disdain that he has for Katharine Hepburn in something like African Queen, right? You get the vibe with Bogart that he's a guy who his disdain for the rich and his disdain for the, the upper crust is because he's kind of been pushed out of those. He knows he couldn't fit in there, right? His Sam Spade is a guy who his disdain for the rich is, he's like, I see how you treat people. I've seen those. Whereas what I'm saying is, whereas Mitchum has that low life energy a bit more, where he can be what he is in the Friends of Eddie Coyle, right? Where he gives you the energy of like, this guy just, he's never questioned his position.
But you see, I think that chip on the shoulder energy that Bogart kind of has wouldn't fit right.
Oh,
for
I
this
agree
role.
with that. Yeah,
I
meant like, when you said the low life thing. That's my.
But I think that's kind of what I'm playing at, is that he plays a kind of low life where you could never really trust him because he's got this like chip on his shoulder and he's always just going to be like kind of looking out for himself. Where Mitchum, he's charming enough where you can buy that he may be able to navigate the underworld pretty easily, but you could also see him just having a picnic out, by the lake with his gal, and he never feels out of place because he's never feels like he's mad that he didn't get to do this before.
I also think Mitchum's physicality adds another dimension to this role. There's that moment I love towards the end of this movie where Mitchum is like kind of about to get roughed up, and he gets slapped once, and then there's going to be a little more roughing him up, and he kind of just almost like ninja. He kind of just like sticks his hands up and stops any more. Like, you're not going to hit me again, basically. He does this sort of like chop block. Like he'll take one slap and sort of deserved it, but it's like, don't press your luck, or he'll like, you try that again and Mitchum's going to, knock your teeth out. That moment is so cool and detached and like very fast, and I don't know, I don't see Bogart like having that type of physicality in that moment. They would have had to figure out another way to do it.
Because I think Mitchum, to your point, Michael, I think Mitchum, one of the things that Mitchum does so well is, we're talking about Bogart and like what the vibe is you get from Bogart, right? And it does seem like when Bogart plays a character, you kind of see his whole backstory, right? In his energy, in his performance. A thing that makes Mitchum work so well, whether it's in this or Crossfire or in any of the westerns he did, is that he works so well in this role because you don't actually know what this guy's backstory is at all, right? When you see him at the gas station at whatever, you could buy him as just a guy that owns a gas station, right? And then when you get the backstory of, well, he roughed up some guys, you buy that too. You don't actually necessarily have any preconceived notions about who this character could be based on Mitchum, because he kind of he doesn't let you in that way, right? That's not to say that that's bad that he has no interiority. It's rather just that he keeps it so close to the vest when he's playing character that you can kind of buy whatever you're gonna get as a development for that character in the story,
Totally. And he fits so much better because I mean, the character Kirk Douglas plays might not have been played by Kirk Douglas if Bogart was cast, but like if you say Kirk Douglas he doesn't like reflect off of Bogart the same way Mitchum does. Like these two guys feel like the two sides of the same coin. They have like a similar look, but Mitchum is kind of guarded and he's not a smooth talker, where Kirk Douglas is always just talking and he's charming. He's got the smile on. He's always trying to get you in so he could like pull the rug out from under you, where Mitchum is always guarded and like, no, I am what I am now. I'm not living in the past, hanging on to things, all of this stuff. And he doesn't bounce well off of Kirk Douglas Bogart. So I just think, whether it's a happy accident or just they made the right choice in the end, they got the two right guys for these roles. It's crazy good how good these guys are.
And to that point, with Mitchum, the other thing that makes that work so well is because he's so cool, and like Michael was saying, like he has that kind of that cool energy. One thing that happens in this movie that I love so much, you can never tell when he's lying, which is so important.
Yeah.
Whereas like Bogart, and again, this is not, no one's bashing Bogart here. We love Bogart, but Bogart will show you when his character is lying in his performance. And there's a thing I was re-listening to recently, Michael, when you were on Gilbert Gottfried's podcast.
Yes.
Once talking about which I will evoke later, because I'm not going to make you do too much, but there's one story you told on one episode that I need to get Tom's reaction to. We'll get back to that in a second. But you talked about like one of the impetus that you and your writing partner Scott had for 500 Days of Summer was you would watch so many romantic comedies and you're like, this bothers me. Like these things bother me when these things do that, and I want to not do that. I think if you're a film fan, and you watch enough noir films or crime films, and you can, I don't know if this is true for you too, but one of the things that is annoying for me is when a character is lying in a movie, right? Lying to the guy who's holding them over, and they decide to perform how much they're lying, where you're like, I don't need you to show me that what you're saying isn't true. And it just makes it feel like the other person is missing the obvious signs of this person's bullshitting me. Whereas Mitchum, he has that scene where he's sitting with Douglas and Douglas is asking him about, well, did you find her and all that? And they don't really, he gets nervous when he sees her, right? Or he sees the woman in the dress who he thinks is her. But when he's talking to Douglas, he never betrays that. He never does he very coolly just goes, I don't need this job. I'll be all right. He has the line of, look, I got along before this job. I ate good. I grew as big as you did. Like, he is actually playing that off in a way that you buy, like, that this guy knows how to lie. This guy knows how to tell it. So I don't know about you guys, but that's always the thing that bothers me in other films when when you're showing us that he's lying, because then I can't buy it. And then Mitchum sells those lies so well. I think that's a testament to that character.
I also think like he tries not to lie to himself.
Yeah.
I mean, he knows he's a fool. Like so much of what he does is because he still has a glimmer of feelings or or hope or something with Kathy. I mean, he's torn. He also at moments later in the movie is repulsed by her, or doesn't trust her, and yet there's a part of him, that still tries to protect her, that still thinks maybe he should run away with her, maybe like it, and he knows he's a fool. He knows there's even a moment in San Francisco where he talks about, he's like, oh, I'm getting framed. I mean, he's honest with himself, even when it doesn't put him in a good light. When it's something he should almost be, I don't want to say embarrassed by, but he knows like, I'm like, he's getting sucked in further, and he doesn't seem to be able to do anything about it.
Now, I will, as always, I read the statement the registry made, but before I do that, just because I want to get it out of the way before we get too into the discussion, Michael, may I call upon you to, if you recall it, relay one small anecdote that you had relayed on the Gilbert show.
I'm nervous because I told Gilbert a lot of stories, and I'm like, oh God,
if you remember it, this involves actor Marlon Brando and a proposed business venture of his. And I would just, if you happen to, recall what that was, I would love to get Tom's going in blind reaction.
So my first job in the industry was working for Robert De Niro, and from time to time, De Niro would have meetings with his like business advisors, who handled all that kind of stuff for him. And one of them was coming in one day because there was something or other that De Niro wanted to invest in, and they were going to talk to him about it. They weren't so sure about it, blah, blah, blah. When the meeting was over, I was like, oh, so, is that like one of the worst ideas you've ever heard? He said, oh my God, not even close. And I go, so what was the worst idea of all your famous clients over the years? And he'd been doing this for decades. And he said to me that Marlon Brando, and I can't remember now. It's been so many years. I probably was told this story 20 years ago. More. Marlon Brando in the late 70s or so, early 80s, he wanted to do a celebrity fart line. And this was during that rise of the like 1-800, 1-900, like those $3.99 the first minute, 99 cents each additional minute, those sort of party line phone call services that you could, and basically Brando was going to go around and ask his famous friends if he could record them passing gas, and he would have this phone number you'd call up, and like, maybe your first fart was free, but then, Dom DeLuise, press 2. For Francis Ford Coppola, press 3, and you could get to hear famous celebrity farts. And they, the business managers, had to talk Brando out of this idea. That was the worst idea they had ever heard.
See, now, this is the kind of story that makes it even funnier when you hear people talk about how, like, nefarious and like conspiratorial Hollywood is, because if a man with that kind of mind could be one of the top stars and power players in that industry, how serious can we truly take this industry as a force that's trying to, like, I don't know, corrupt people's minds? No. One of the greatest actors of all time, who was a power player for decades, wanted to go up to other people in this industry and say, hey, could you please fart into this device for me so I could get money off of your flatulence? I love it. This industry, never change. Please never
but
change.
I'm just saying, maybe Brando was a genius. Like, who knows? This idea could have worked. Maybe people would have loved it. This is like a couple years after The Pet Rock was a huge sensation.
Well, I mean, Jesus Christ, how many times nowadays do we have to hear people say, don't kink shame? Somebody would absolutely call, because their kink is, I want to hear Dom DeLuise rip a nice big old McDonald's fart. I just need to hear it.
I would argue a celebrity fart line is a more honorable side business than celebrities hawking NFTs.
You know what?
Yeah.
Kyle, we have a promotional audio clip every episode, and I think that might have to be it. Sans context. I just want that one statement there.
I thought you were about to tell me that you had an NFT sponsor who's
No. Good God.
Oh, I would
Tom,
never allow that.
You have no idea who sponsors this show. You don't listen to the podcast.
Listen, let me be righteous for just a minute, all right? Let me be
But
self-righteous
Mike,
for a minute.
thank
Just
you
let
for
me have
relaying
this.
that anecdote. I need you to know I think about it anytime I see Marlon Brando on screen now. So that has
Or anytime he eats a branded meal at
that
McDonald's and then
happens too
farts.
often. My branded foods. Anyway,
I miss Gilbert. I miss his laugh.
Oh, yes.
It was the joy of my career was getting to spend a few hours with him a few times and make him laugh. So I'm sure those episodes are still up, and there were a few other crazy anecdotes. So
well, you being on there was some of the best, because the best episodes of that show were always when it was just somebody else could show up and go, let's swap old Hollywood stories. Like, let's just talk about, and evoke celebrities. It was always the best because, those of us that love movies, we have facts in our brains about actors that no one has thought of in 50 years. So if you can find somebody else who, when you say a name like Peggy Singleton, they nod, you're like, oh, good. Okay, we can,
Well, by the way, you guys for a future episode should have Frank Sanopadre on, because Frank is his brain is like a TCM library and would be a fantastic guest on your show.
I mean, but by all means, if you want to pass that email. Now, without any further ado, now that we have covered the Marlon Brando flatulence story, I want to make sure I got that in. One of my favorites. Let's talk about what the National Film Registry had to say about Out of the Past. Here's
The Godfather.
Here's what the Library of Congress had to say. This classic example of 1940s film noir features some of the genre's best dialogue. Daniel Manwaring, under the pseudonym Jeffrey Holmes, smartly adapted his novel Build My Gallows High, and the stars Robert Mitchum and Jane Greer breathe life and larceny into his characters. Private Eye Robert Mitchum is hired by a notorious gangster, Kirk Douglas, to find his mistress Kathy, Jane Greer, who shot him and ran off with a load of dough. Jeff traces Kathy to Mexico, but falls for her and gets caught in her web of deception and murder. Directed with supreme skill by Jacques Tourneur and brilliantly photographed by Nicholas Mizuraka, this film introduced the famous Mitchum screen persona of sleepy-eyed cynic ready to toss out a line like, "Baby, I don't care," with nonchalant sex appeal. Jane Greer is equally effective, a combination of erotic fire and cool detachment. So that's what the Library of Congress had to say. Now, two things about that. One, they had a lot to say, which I appreciate. And two, they seem to actually like the movie in that statement, which, Michael, this may surprise you, weirdly isn't always the case with the registry statements. Sometimes
weird.
They're weirdly down. I texted Tom, their write-up for W.C. Fields' The Bank Dick spends most of its time saying they don't get the movie. It's very odd.
They mentioned the book.
Yes.
Build My Gallows High, which is a great title. And I read somewhere when they released this movie in the UK, that was the title they used, Build My Gallows High, which is awesome. And I love that moment, that couplet towards the end when he's talking to Kathy and he says, "Build my gallows high, baby."
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like the title of a spaghetti western.
Yeah.
So obviously I love that.
Now, I will say, we didn't talk about Jane Greer at all prior to our reading the statement. Obviously, all the credit in the world to her. She is, she carries this film in so many moments.
She's what, 21 or 22 when she made this movie?
Yes, something like that. I don't remember the exact age, but yeah, she's young. And weirdly, she returns in the remake in the late 80s. Because they
Really?
remake this film. It's called Against All Odds. Has anyone else here actually seen Against All Odds?
No, I've not seen it.
Okay.
But that's
Jeff Bridges and James Woods, and that's where the Phil Collins song comes from.
That's what I was going to ask. That's what I thought the Phil Collins song was from that, but I've never seen the movie. But it's not what I thought you were going to say when you talked about a remake.
Okay.
I thought you were going to bring up from the late 80s Saturday Night Live.
Oh, and Out of Gas. Oh, that was in my notes. That was coming up later. You're right. Yes.
Sorry. I jumped
No, you're absolutely right. That is Robert Mitchum hosted SNL in the 80s.
87, I believe, which was like kind of a transition year. I could be wrong.
Yep. Simply Red was the musical guest. And I know this because if you go on Peacock, they have, in theory, every episode of SNL, but they cut out anything they don't instantly have the rights to, right? Entirely. So that means the Robert Mitchum episode that was originally 90 minutes on Peacock is only 23 minutes long. And there's no Simply Red performances, and the only Mitchum you see is his monologue.
Whoa.
That's it. There's like 2 sketches and like 1 pre-film bit. Out of Gas is not on Peacock. You have to like seek that out on a, somebody posted it on Twitter. That's the only way I was able to watch it. But yes, him and Jane Greer reunite to do a spoof of Out of the Past called Out of Gas on an episode Mitchum hosted in the 80s where he is dressed in the way that I guess old Hollywood actors all dressed in the 80s with the big sunglasses. Like he kind of looks like Charles Nelson Riley when he's hosting this episode.
Looks like Sam
Yeah.
Rothstein.
And my favorite part of this monologue, folks, go on Peacock and look it up if you can. The best part is, so it's Robert Mitchum and the musical guest is Simply Red. Mitchum has no idea who that is. And when he's introducing them in his monologue, goes, "We're going to have a great time tonight. We got this band. They're called Simply Red." As though, not only does he not know who they are, but he's saying that as though the audience would not know what the hell that is. Sadly, that's the only part I'm...
Also sounds like they just told him the
Like
name of the
5 minutes.
band as he walked out.
But yes,
What was he hosting for? What was
I have no idea. Because the other thing is like
87? Would that have been Scrooged?
I see. My guess is, and this is, I could be wrong. So, growing up, my introduction to him were the 2 miniseries, Winds of War.
Oh yes,
and War and Remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the Herman Wouk, is that how you say Herman Wouk?
I think so.
Herman Wouk novels. And I remember I was way too young to be watching them, but I watched them with my grandparents, and they were very well done. Again, I was a kid, but I mean, I was interested. And then I rewatched them some years later, and I really enjoyed them. And he's great. He plays this sort of this patriarch figure to this large family, and it's a sprawling epic. But I feel like it might be Winds of War was early 80s, but I wonder if War and Remembrance, I feel like, was late 80s.
We also forget that, like...
War and Remembrance was 88.
So...
I'm not looking this
because
up,
remember,
so I'm very
up
curious
until,
about
like,
this.
it wasn't until the 90s, I don't think, that every single host was plugging something, right? Like,
That's
you go to those
true. That's
early
true.
80s seasons, like, Desi Arnaz Jr. hosts an episode, Milton Berle hosts an episode. Like, there were times where they were just like, who is an old celebrity that we like? Let's get them on. But this is late 80s, so it could have been, because this is the season, I think it's John Lovitz, Victoria Jackson, Dana Carvey, Jan
I
Hooks.
think it was their first year. I said transition before. I think it was the first year of most of those people, right?
Most of them. Lovitz I think Victoria Jackson and John Lovitz were on like the previous season, because Lovitz is the only one who survives that 85 culling, right?
Oh, right.
Because that's the Lorne Michaels bit is,
the fire.
The cast is trapped in the in the burning building, and he only saves Lovitz. But yeah, so Robert Mitchum did host, but it is weird if you watch it on Peacock. Mitchum does his monologue, and then you never see him again until the credits.
All right, so it's probably not tied into anything, because the only thing he does in 87 is a 2-part episode of The Equalizer, and War and Remembrance is a year later, and he doesn't have a theatrically released movie in 87. So probably just somebody saying, I don't know, we can get Mitchum.
I just want to say my favorite part of this, getting a vibe of this room, is that we should start taking bets on which one of us is going to seek out Robert Mitchum on a 2-part episode of The Equalizer first.
It's Mike.
We're all thinking it. It's Mike. Tom, there are
co-host.
I was going to say,
that.
that's Tom. That's cheating as a bet. Realistically, you've split.
That is cheating. Yeah, I am cheating. But no,
my co-host is TV. I don't think I know what The Equalizer is, but I don't think I've ever seen it, and I know it.
Neither have I.
For quite a few seasons.
It's
Denzel's the only Equalizer I need.
No, but we have to like The Equalizer because Rob Reiner yells about it in Wolf of Wall Street in one of his finest live deliveries.
Yes, that's right. Mad Max. Angry about The Equalizer. Love it.
But to talk about Against All Odds for a second, so Jane Greer is in that, but Against All Odds, if you haven't seen it, don't. It's not very good. I should know that. It's very weird because it's trying to do a modern noir, but it decides to make Jeff Bridges...
He's a football player,
He's a football player who gets cut from his team, and James Woods is the Kirk Douglas character. There's also no flashback to this. There's no voiceover. It's James Woods is like a drug dealer type, and he recruits Jeff Bridges to help him track down this woman, who the mother of the woman is played by Jane Greer. So that's how she shows up, and she's a high society woman. It tries to do a bit of like LA municipal, crime thing in it, and the ending is completely different. The ending is like Jeff Bridges lives, she lives, everybody lives. He just sees her get married to somebody else and walks away sadly.
That is so very 80s. But see, like,
Hey,
all right,
Tom,
so
you know how it could be more 80s?
how
Because when he walks away from her, we stay on her as the credits roll, and what do you hear?
November Rain.
Take a look at me now.
It should have been November Rain. I'm sorry. It should have been November Rain. See, like the James Woods being a drug dealer thing, that actually is like if you're updating it to the 80s, that fits. Like that's kind of like the equivalent in my mind, because what I love about Kirk Douglas's character is that he's not like an out and out gangster kind of guy. Like he's a criminal, but they say, oh, he's a professional gambler. So he's got this like Meyer Lansky sort of vibe to him instead of like a Lucky Luciano or somebody where, yeah, we see him beat up Jane Greer and everything. And, if he has to pull a gun, we'd believe he'd pull a gun on someone, but you don't think he's going to beat up Mitchum. Like, oh, he's a gambler. Okay. That's why he has henchmen. So I like that. Obviously it's the 80s. They're riding the Miami Vice high, Coke. But the football player thing is just bizarre. What even is that?
It feels like that weird thing, and we'll get back to actual Out of the Past in a second, but this weird thing in like 70s and 80s films, because football is a factor in 70s and 80s films in weird ways where you're like, it feels like Hollywood going, people like this on TV. Football's the most popular sport. Can we make people care about football player characters in movies? And it never quite lands. Like, Heaven Can Wait. You always forget that Warren Beatty's a football player in that movie.
For the LA Rams.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because if you think Warren Beatty, you're like, that dude's probably great at football. That guy's build and general vibe just says football player to me.
Well, honestly, football was big at that in that era, and I wonder if it has anything to do with football being like a much grittier sport, especially at the time. Like the guys would just like wear like casts and just beat the shit out of the other players on the field and never get penalties.
But isn't it also the Joe Namath factor too? That like
I don't know. Namath was like famous 15 like in the 60s.
I know, but what I mean is more the fact that like Joe Namath feels like the guy who was first able to kind of cross over and go from being a football player to a celebrity. And you see them try to like to bring back Saturday Night Live. Fran Tarkenton hosts Saturday Night Live. There is an attempt early on to try and like go, can we make football players what baseball players were in the 30s and 40s?
I wouldn't say it's not totally what's happening, but I wonder if a lot of it has to do with Burt Reynolds.
That's true.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah,
because Burt was a big football player before he became famous, and then he made like a bunch of football movies, and like even like only a few years before this fucking remake comes out, he's making oh god, what's the name of the movie he made with Chris Christopherson? I can't remember, but he made football movies. I think Burt Reynolds is probably kind of the thing that helps elevate the football thing.
And also a football player had been president not that long before. Gerald Ford was like almost in the NFL.
I just think it's also just a job, a career, a lifestyle that denoted a certain type of masculinity.
And it was
want to make it a military guy. They didn't want to make it that he's already a criminal. They wanted to, I think it probably just it's a piece that fit for the story at that time. But
and at the time, football really wasn't a big money industry. So the kind of guys that played football were much rougher and gruffer, and like in the off season were working as bouncers at bars and shit. They were kind of dealing more in a. I guess in the end, it does make a little bit of sense if you wanted to just, I mean, how many private eyes were in business in 1984? I don't know. But either way, I'm not going to watch this movie, so this is a moot point.
It's odd. By the way, just point of order, the Phil Collins song lost the Oscar to I Just Called to Say I Love You from The Woman in Red. In case anybody was wondering, another movie where we only know the song and nobody's seen the actual film.
Isn't it like 60% of movies from the 80s, though, to be honest?
Yep. Not wrong. Not wrong. There's a long stretch because I think like the very next year, Lionel Richie wins for the song from White Nights, which is a good movie. That movie holds up, but nobody watches
White
it.
Nights is a good movie, and I will say that plane crash in the beginning of White Nights is terrifying and very ahead of its time in terms of how convincing that plane crash is.
And Helen Mirren, very convincing as a Russian, which is very weird. There were people who saw that movie and just assumed she was Russian. Anyway, this is not a White Nights podcast. It's not in the registry yet. I will fight hard for it. Baryshnikov is a better actor than he gets credit for. Anyway, let's talk about, quite frankly, more actors who are better than they get credit for, which is the folks in Out of the Past.
Do you guys have a favorite line in the movie? I mean, it's like the script is so sharp. Like even if we can't describe the plot because it gets so crazy in the second half, do you guys have a favorite line?
Oh yeah, for me it's technically 2 lines. Because it's the way that when she first comes into the restaurant, they has that line, "Then I saw her coming out of the sun." And then later says, "Then she walked in out of the moonlight." And just that little thing, right? That little thing of, you could have just phrased it a million ways if she came in, and so many noirs, I think, because I have my problems with a lot of, like, especially neo-noirs. We talked about this a lot on Chinatown, that they kind of missed the point. And so many people writing noirs, especially now, would just do the standard, "She came into my joint. She walked in here. She walked over," But the fact that
you mean like what Naked Gun parodies so well?
Yes, absolutely. And this, I think, just the idea of choosing, it doesn't take much in terms of when you're sitting there writing to change it from, she came in out of the sun, to just that idea of she walked in, I saw her coming out of the sun, and then, contrasting with, and then she walked in out of the moonlight. It just gives this thing a bit of an otherworld quality in a lot of ways, which I think is that's a little thing, but I love it to death.
So for me, it's when Kathy says to Jeff, "I don't want to die," and Jeff goes, "Neither do I, baby. But if I have to, I'm gonna die last." I mean,
that's
that's
my
just
favorite
like
too.
that's
That's
just
mine
like
also.
just put that on the poster and nothing else, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna see that movie. That's a pretty good line, guys. Good job. A for effort.
That's my favorite also. That one's hard to top. I do love when he's like, "You're like a leaf that the wind blows from one gutter to another."
Yes.
It's like, oof.
I mean, that's what's so, like, another thing that's so crazy about this movie though is that, like, Jacques Tourneur is such a he's such a visually just impressive filmmaker. Like, you even look at his older horror movies like Cat People.
I was going to say 5 years before this, he's doing Cat People.
Yeah, like, and that movie is like, not to say anything about the script. It's a great script for, especially for that kind of genre picture, but it's a movie where you're going to remember the visuals, or in his case, the lack thereof of visuals, and building a sense of dread through visuals that don't actually show you anything. So for him to bring, I mean, because this is a gorgeous movie also, but to also have a script that's just filled with this many good lines where you're just like, oh, I mean, this is the top of the peak for him at this point. I mean, this kind of script measuring up to his visuals, I mean, how do you even beat that?
Well, because we say it all the time, a good script can, the best scripts can become really mediocre movies if the wrong person is at the helm. Like, I think we all, and no one's going to name names, we have all at some point read a script that we've gone, well, if they just greenlight this, like, this is a goddamn Best Picture winner right here. And then the movie actually comes out and you go, that was fine. And it's not like they changed the dialogue. It's not like that, but you need the execution of that to be so good.
Hell, I'm not going to speak out of turn here or anything, but a movie I just watched was not like Best Picture. Oh, this would have been a Best Picture, but like, I watched this movie on the last drive-in with Joe Bob called Witchboard. It's trying so hard to not be the stock horror movie thing. The characters are much more interesting than they have any right to be, but you just watch it and you go, fuck, I wish this was just done better. Like, the script is there, maybe another pass or something, but like, if this was just executed better, this would be a much more well-loved 80s horror movie than something that even Joe Bob gives 2.5 stars to.
Oh, by the way, another line that I did love, to the point that you made before, Michael, was just the exchange after she shoots his partner, right? And he says, "You didn't have to kill him," and she just responds with, "You wouldn't have killed him." It's just like it's a concise thing, but you could just say so much with just one line and let the picture do the rest of the talking. I think is terrific.
I mean, this is the kind of thing that, it's I wouldn't say it's pure cinema in the strictest sense. You could get this in one of these like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett novels, but like just having that, like just the way it's so perfectly laid together with those actors and the way he's shooting them, saying those lines, it's just a little different than what you'd get reading it on the page. It's just so deliciously, like, I don't know, diabolical, some of these lines. And
I think the characters and the dialogue, all of that, and the visuals, all of those elements are so strong, is why you can get away with a structure that's so funky and a plot that might not even fully make sense at times. You can get away with it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're not. It's like, it's okay if you're confused by the plot. It's, you're like in flashback for the better part of the first 35, 40 minutes, and then there's no flashbacks after that. Like, so it's such an interesting structure in that way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to pull off now.
No.
And then even the whole caper to get the papers and then getting framed, and then there's like a caper within a frame job within a, like, it doesn't matter that stuff is confusing, because you are tracking what everyone's feeling.
Yeah.
Even if you're not fully understanding all the intricacies of the plot.
And it almost feels like Tourneur knows that with Noir, the plot really doesn't actually matter. Because I can't remember exactly. I think it was Raymond Chandler, when talking about the big sleep, someone pointed out, well, how did this guy kill this other guy if he was here doing this? And Raymond Chandler just goes, it doesn't matter.
I think it was the big sleep, and I think I feel like the story was they had to telegram Chandler to like get him to explain part of the plot. But yes, it's the gist of it. It's he didn't know, and it didn't matter.
Yeah, it's so, and it seems like this is Tourneur saying, like, yeah, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to have this crazy structure and just throw all of these tricks at you and make it look gorgeous and have these great lines and these actors delivering it and track the emotions, because really, who fucking cares about, oh, she maybe stole this money, but she didn't, but actually she did, and she killed this guy, and then she ran back to Kirk Douglas, and Kirk Douglas hires Mitchum to do this, but he's actually setting Mitchum up to fall for this, and the girl's actually playing both sides again, and you're just like, all right, literally, I don't fucking, like, I need a quantum physics degree to figure out.
All the movie actually needs to do, it doesn't matter if you're following the plot, all it needs to do is it needs to hit you with 3 beats. It needs to hit you when Mitchum sees her and starts to fall for her, right?
Yeah.
Fall for Kathy, and you need to be invested in that. Obviously, it needs to get you at the end when he gets killed and the deaf boy tells her that, tells the other woman that he ran off. But the crucial beat is at the middle, which you talked about, it was flashback till it's not. When the reveal comes that Kathy got back with Kirk Douglas, as long as your stomach drops when you see that, the movie's achieved all it needs to do, right? That's going to carry you for the next half of the film, right?
Yeah.
That's the tough thing to pull off, I think.
And that's what I'm saying. It feels like Tourneur knows, like, you just need these big things and track how, like Michael said, like, you just need to know how they're feeling. That's all you need. So just throw all of this mishigas in and just go for the ride. And
I'd also
it works.
say, like, the movie has such a doomed quality from the beginning, despite the lightness of this sort of more rural town. The way that Mitchum approaches, he's been summoned back to this person from his past. He doesn't push back. He doesn't resist. He already acts like a man who's heading to the gallows. There's such a vibe of, this is going to end badly for everyone early on, that part of why some of those little twists of the plot, it doesn't matter if you can fully track them. It's because you know deep down this is not going to end well. This is not the vibe early on is not one of there's going to be a real happy ending here for anyone or any of the major characters.
And you get those, and that's helped by those gorgeous on location shots at the beginning too, like the
Right.
picking on.
It's impressive, even more impressive, because this movie doesn't overdo the darkness and shadows. It's honestly like a pretty well lit movie for a noir, all things considered. You know, like if you're going for this doomed quality, you might overdo it with how dark everything is and the shadows and all of this. It's really not that darkly shot. It's honestly more like the camera angles and the music that's leading you into this feeling of, oh, we're just digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a morass that Mitchum kind of just knows he's stuck in and can't get out of. So he's gonna try, but he knows that there's probably no happy ending coming for him at this point. So,
but I'd argue that it's interesting how all the darkness and the shadows and all that are in the urban scenes. There's something so idyllic about this town that's 300 something miles from LA that's away from it all, and there's streams and rivers and fishing, and it's so there's something like a heavenly quality to it, that maybe he's left his past behind. And then suddenly whenever we're in the city, I mean, it's a lot of interiors that are sort of claustrophobic and shadowy, and even some of the city exteriors when getting in and out of the cars and stuff. It's the urban landscape is the sort of where those noir elements sort of come to the forefront.
Well, and also the Mexican aspects of it, in terms of, I was thinking about, this comes out the same year, I believe, or 1 year apart from Ride the Pink Horse, which is another noir that has same year, has like that New Mexican setting, and the way that they're kind of, it feels as though when a noir film does that, bouncing between Los Angeles and Mexico or New Mexico, what have you, it does seem like they also establish that contrast there of, when you have a noir that's set in LA or the scenes are in LA, it's very much like it's very clear that there's just bad guys, tough guys, hoods, gun malls, whatever. Like, you're bound to what you are. And then the way they set up those Mexican environments is always kind of like, there's a lot more gray area. There's a lot more, you can kind of just be who you are and we don't care. Be whatever you want. You know, you're whoever you are. You can kind of escape it all. Whereas when you come back to the big city, the idea is like, you are whoever you were. There's not really a way to escape that. Someone always knows who you are. Someone's always going to pop up. So I think that's an interesting thing, especially, like I said, Ride the Pink Horse comes the same year, which does a similar trick.
well, it 100% agree. I'm just saying, what surprises me is that those elements, the city elements, and even like the mansion that Kirk Douglas is in like in the climax when he finds him dead and everything, it's shadowy and it's very noir, but it doesn't overdo it despite being so doom laden. It's something that a lesser director would have overdone to tell you, oh, everything's going to go bad because look at how dark everything is in the city, and look at how dark. It's just very such an impressive balancing act Tourneur is able to pull off without overdoing any of the specific noir elements. They're all just so perfectly calibrated in their way.
And I will also say, to go back to Michael's main point about the film not being able to, needing to follow the plot because of the vibes and the energy, one thing this film does so well, I think, is that regardless of how much you're necessarily invested in the story itself, whenever a character is reintroduced, you feel a sinking feeling because you just keep thinking, even though, Michael, to your point, like, there's a doomed feeling from the beginning, you're hopeful that things are going to get a little better than that. So when the partner shows up again, you're like, oh no, not right now. Every single person that reappears, all the way up to the fact that Anne, the woman from the beginning, shows up again like an hour and 13 minutes into the movie. And you don't think, like, who was that? And you don't go like, it's another instance of people get introduced into this film at the worst time. And you're like, well, now there's another wrinkle in the plan. There's another bump in the road. It's just about hitting you and hitting you at the right times to make you feel something, which I think this just does so well. And also, I will say, Michael, to your point, you mentioned, the film, you don't need to follow the plot. Is that your plan the next time you get like a notes meeting to just let them know, like, guys, don't worry about it. Just vibes. I got a film from 1947. Just vibes. Stick with me.
Well, I will say, it's interesting. It does feel like a lot of neo-noir and a lot of even like noir television nowadays, you can't get away with a plot that would be this sort of confusing and have holes in it like this. Like,
Yeah.
I think
No.
I don't know enough about film history, I guess, to explain why they could get away with it in this movie, in The Big Sleep. But movies nowadays, you would need to, I don't know, I think your plot would need to make a lot more sense. Like, you would be dinged, and rightfully so.
It's the YouTubeization of film criticism, basically, or film watching. You don't even have to be in film Twitter for people to be like, oh, do you know, like, Red Letter Media or this, that, or the other YouTube channel where it's all about, oh, well, look at this plot hole. Look at this plot hole. This movie's bad because of this. We followed the Chase the Cat Screenbook, Save the Cat Screenbook thing. And it's just like, no, there was a time where we could have just been like, no, it happened because this is a movie and it's cool. That's all you need to know. I mean, shit, look at 3 years ago. How many people dinged Tenet for having a plot that is, by all accounts, just pure nonsense.
Right.
And it's now getting reclaimed because people are able to look at.
I mean, past guest of the show, Patrick Willems, just put out his whole video about how Tenet is the ultimate vibes movie,
Miami Vice, the same video, there's now, there is a YouTube and social media in general has made it so everything we talk about it all the time on the show. There are things where you have to be so logical and follow these.
I wonder, to your point, Tom, and to Michael's point, I wonder how much of that also is the fact that by the time, if you're watching out of the past and you're doing like we have to do for the show, which is like take notes as you watch it, you're going to notice the plot issues or how hard it is to follow the plot. But if you're just watching it like I watched the first time or any of us watched it the first time, by the time the movie's over, you don't care because you just had a satisfying experience. And I think that with movies, back in those, in older times, people, I mean, they had no way to react to a movie midway through it or anything like that. And I do think
watch a movie.
Yeah, but you were willing to just take the whole ride, right? And now, I think because we're so media saturated, the minute you bump up against something in a film or in a story, you're already reacting to that. You're already responding to that moment. You could pause the movie and tweet about it or look something up, or even if not, you're just going to get hung up on it, and you're not necessarily giving the film or the storytellers the benefit of the doubt to be like, okay, maybe by the end of this film, this will all track, or this will all make sense, or maybe it doesn't bother you by the end. I don't know. That's just my thoughts. But obviously, Michael, you're working in the industry much more actively than either of us are, so I don't know how you feel about that.
There's a period noir. It's a little bit of a genre bending thing that Scott and I want to write. We haven't written it yet, but I think we would make sure that the plot. It's okay for the audience to be confused at times, but eventually they need to sort of, I think, understand what's going on. Or, I mean, maybe these movies got away with it because the characters had such depth, because the morality the wasn't so black and white, and that was what was so interesting. I mean, working under the production code and some of those limitations, I mean, it's just a different time for filmmaking. So I'm sure the internet and the media and all that has something to do with it now, and the way we sort of experience and analyze movies has evolved, for better or worse. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good, trying to think of movies nowadays where you sort of disregard if the plot was this convoluted because the character work is so strong and the performances are so strong and all the other elements are so strong, and I'm drawing a blank.
I think there's one person who does it well and has done it well their entire career. I think Rian Johnson does that brilliantly. I think you look at the Knives Out movies and you look at what he's done with Poker Face and all of that, like, there's certainly, if you want to sit there and poke holes in some of that stuff, or, you know, the leaps that he has, or even going all the way back to Brick, right? Like, those are movies that have mysteries, that have twisty-turny plots and all these things that if you really wanted to be a dick, you could sit down and go, well, this doesn't work, or I don't know if this lines up, or this is a bit of a stretch, especially with, like, Glass Onion. But you're just having so much fun, and you're so caught up in those characters, and you're enjoying the ride so much that, like, why? Why poke holes in any of that, right? Why sit down with any episode of Poker Face and go, well, how did they know that this? Because they did. Because it happened. Because, you know, like, we talked about it on somebody else's podcast about the movie Magnolia, but I'm like, my favorite rule for writing, for watching movies, for anything is a quote from that movie, which is, but it did happen. It's like, you can have such a better time if when you're watching a movie and you go, I don't know if that would happen, but it did happen. But it did happen. That's what happened. So just go with that. I don't know if you guys, but I think Rian Johnson does manage to avoid the trappings of, like, getting too caught up and having to logic it too much.
I think Chris Nolan's done it sometimes too. I mean, I think Memento is super confusing, and it really ultimately doesn't matter if you can fully follow all of the twists within the rules of that.
Hell,
but the
Dark Knight
characters have such depth to them that you're locked in for reasons other than because you fully understand the plot.
Hell, Dark Knight does the same thing, and then you counteract that with The Dark Knight Rises, which a lot of people aren't able to look past a lot of the nonsense in that movie, which I don't know. I think maybe the thing that we're talking about with that Rian Johnson's able to get away with it and why Nolan's sometimes able to get away with it is that Rian Johnson's stuff isn't self-important, and Memento wasn't self-important. Dark Knight wasn't self-important. Dark Knight Rises was maybe a little too self-important for its own good. I wonder if it's just a little bit of like, hey guys, we're here to have fun. Let's just have fun. Come on, let's just have fun. I wonder if that's a big thing.
It's funny you say that, Tom. It's funny you say that because I feel like Noir was that of its era.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, RKO was not one of the big boys. That was not one of the major studios, right? Kirk Douglas was on loan from Paramount, I believe.
Yeah.
Like Robert Mitchum was an RKO star, not a Warner star, a Paramount star. Like Noir in some way where they were made for less money.
Yep.
They were they were allowed to be darker because they were less expensive. There wasn't necessarily that happy ending, right? Always like they could sort of have that more complex morality. So the point, I think you just made such a smart point, and my understanding, again, I'm not like really a real film scholar, but was that Noir was that, like, it sort of, they were allowed to have a little more of this sort of creative freedom and creative allowances because they were making these movies for less money and sort of knowing that it didn't have the same sort of commercial pressures that a lot of other films of that time had.
They were programmers. They were B movies. They were the programmers. It's the same reason why a lot of horror movies can still get away with being nonsense, because you go, all right, it's a horror movie. As good as it can be, we're going to overlook some things because for the most part, I don't really know many people that are going to upstate New York and getting kidnapped and having their brains taken out and put into the bodies of black people, or white people, I should say, I don't know many people that are getting haunted by a dream demon who our parents killed 20 years prior. Not something I really need to out logic, where I just go, all right.
Well, that's the big thing is the audience is willing to take the ride, right?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that I think anybody working in film today has to overcome, is just getting the audience to be willing to take that ride, to be willing to say what did happen.
You know what the perfect example for today is, and how you can compare and contrast the difference, is Nicholas Refn. Why was Drive so well received by people, but then, I know not you, Mike, but for the most part, people enjoy Drive. But then he gets deeper and deeper into this thing where the movies start making less and less sense, but they start crawling further up their own asses in self-importance. And people start going, oh, we don't actually like Refn, we just liked Drive.
Well, that was the thing. It was the wild thing. And I don't know how you feel about Refn, Michael, but like just seeing the shift from Drive premieres at Cannes and it gets standing ovations and everybody's like, well, this is incredible. And then he does Only God Forgives, which is a very similar film, and people were booing it and were like, this is reprehensible.
No, but Drive is a very simple, straightforward, just, well, here's a guy, he's a driver, he gets into trouble, the girl he likes gets into trouble, and he kills some people. That's it. Only God Forgives, and then Neon Demon. He's made 2 TV shows, made 26, 30 hours of content for Amazon and then Netflix, and only the staunchest Refn fans enjoyed it. Anybody else who watched it was like, what the fuck is even happening in this thing? There's vampires now? What is happening? And I think he's kind of the perfect encapsulation. Drive was kind of lighthearted and was just like, just go for the ride.
Yeah, that's
go for the ride.
I think, Michael, as a person who's working in the industry now, I know obviously, like you said, you're not, you write a number of things. Do you ever find yourself as a storyteller feeling like there is a bit of a disparity between the exact story that you want to tell and what you think in a modern audience is going to take the ride for? Or do you not necessarily think about that as you're coming up with a story?
It's a good question. I'd say in recent years, Scott and I have done a lot more adaptations. And it's not that we don't love writing originals. We just don't tend to write originals that are bigger budget movies or potential franchises and tentpoles. And so for us, adaptations usually have a built-in audience. It's often easier to navigate the studio system and get things made when it's based on IP. So I'm answering your question in a roundabout way because if I'm adapting a popular book, I am tapping into what I liked about the book. Hopefully it aligns with what other people liked about the book that made it successful, and then trying to replicate that feeling. Now, you can't replicate the book because, how long would a movie be? I mean, books are so much longer and they, branch out a lot of ways. So to the extent that I'm thinking about the audience, I am thinking about, these were the moments that were so special for different reasons or made me feel something different ways in the book. What's the best way to translate that to a movie-going experience? Beyond that, I'm not thinking about the audience too much. I'm thinking about myself. Scott and I think about our taste. I mean, we love going to the movies. We love watching movies. We sort of oftentimes we'll hear an idea and go, ugh, at first, and then we'll think, well, what's the version of that we'd be excited to go see? What's the spin we can put on this? What's the version of this we haven't seen before? So, we are the audience too, is what I'm trying to say when I my way of sort of answering that question of thinking as a fan, what would I be excited about? It's so collaborative. So many people are involved. There will be eventually so many people cooking in the kitchen with us that other people will join us to collaborate who will be much more focused on how the audience feels about this or that and what and that's fine. Everybody's got a role to play in this. So beyond what I just described, that's the extent to which we sort of think about the potential audience when we're initially diving into something. I want to ask you guys a question.
Sure.
Go for it.
This is something my wife and I were talking about when we were watching the movie because she had watched it for the first time. I'd seen it a handful of times. So at the end, Jeff makes this phone call, Robert Mitchum. Mm-hmm. He's at Kirk Douglas's. Kirk is dead. He's at the house. Mitchum's gonna run off with Jane Greer, but he picks up the phone. We don't know what he's doing. They get in the car, and they're driving off, and then she sees the roadblock and the cops, and it's clear he called the cops. Robert Mitchum has played her.
Yeah.
Does she shoot him in the belly or does she shoot him in the crotch?
Okay.
And I think I asked this question because, again, they're working under the production code, mm-hmm. but it's a really ambiguous and kind of interesting given what has transpired and sort of the choices Robert Mitchum has made up to this point. I'm curious what you guys think about where she shoots him.
Michael, I will have you know, I thought about this because I wasn't clear either. And, sometimes in movies you read into things. So I have the same Blu-ray you do. and I went into that Blu-ray commentary because I went, let's see if he talks about this. Right? Like, let's see if there's an answer here. And even the guy doing the commentary goes, I've watched this movie countless times, and I can't tell if she's shooting him in the stomach or in the crotch. So I was like, oh, good. First off, I'm not a lunatic for looking at this and going, is she doing the RoboCop dick shoot? But or the Butters South Park dick shoot. Weirdly, that episode was on today, and I just remembered that.
But it really does look like she's sticking the gun. I mean, and it's sort of he even to the point where he lies to Kirk Douglas a little before this about who killed Fisher, and is like, oh, Joe killed Fisher, when it was Kathy who did it. Like, he's kind of thinking with his dick for a lot of this movie. Yeah. It's sort of fitting if that's where she shoots him.
I agree. Look, I can't. I'll let Tom answer. I'll just say for myself, I don't know whether she shoots him in the stomach or the dick, but I know what I want to believe. Right? Like, this is a Life of Pi scenario. At the end, it's like, which story do you want to believe? I want to believe the one with the tiger. I want to believe she shoots him in the dick. Tom?
Oh, she shoots him in the dick. I mean,
confidence.
I mean,
I'm honored you guys picked me. I don't know how many movies made have been enshrined that involve a dick shooting, but I'm honored. I'm honored to
listen. If we find any more movies upcoming, obviously anything else also we'll throw your way. But if there's any movies we see that have a dick shot in it, we'll definitely throw you a line. Also, just as a final point for me, kind of a proto Bonnie and Clyde kind of ending there, with the cops just ambushing them and just shooting the shit out of their car, kind of not really caring if Mitchum gets out of the car or not, since he clearly called them and said, hey, get this crazy broad. They just light them up.
Remind me a little of Chinatown, which I thought you guys had an awesome episode of Chinatown this season.
Thank you.
I really like, not exactly the same in terms of the plot mechanics at the end, but that sort of like doomed car ride to nowhere at the end, feeling cops shooting. Like there are some Chinatown vibes and Chinatown bleakness.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely, if Polanski didn't watch it, then definitely Town watched it and had that in his mind when writing the script. So 100%, yeah.
And the only thing that could have made it better is if they had then played a Phil Collins song. Now, Tom, as we always do when we wrap up,
0.
How do you think you have to let me finish the question. It's Jeopardy.
No, I don't.
Tom.
No, I don't.
How do you think Out of the Past fared at the Academy Awards?
Oh, well, see, if you put it that way, I'm going to say 0.
Well, you are correct, but it is interesting, I will note, because a different Robert Mitchum B picture is nominated this year. The Best Picture nominees this year were The Bishop's Wife, which later gets remade as The Preacher's Wife, Crossfire, which stars Robert Mitchum, is the first B movie to be nominated for Best Picture, and won the Palme d'Or that year. It was one of those years where they gave it multiple palms, but Crossfire, which is a drama tackling anti-Semitism, Great Expectations, Miracle on 34th Street, and the winner, Gentleman's Agreement, which is another movie tackling anti-Semitism. So it was in the air at the time. Of those films, Miracle on 34th Street and Gentleman's Agreement are both in the National Film Registry, so we will be covering them in future seasons. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. This is so cool. This was just wild.
This was amazing. So cool that you did this. Thank you so much for joining, man.
Oh my God, guys, I love this. So much fun. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for sticking around so close to your hard out time that unfortunately we don't have time for Kyle to ask all of the questions he prepared for you before this record. Sorry, Kyle, it's cut for time, man. I got no control over this. We hope you will come back on a future season. It's always open to you. This was so cool. Thank you so much. Everybody else. Oh, do you have anything you want to plug on the way out?
No. Please go see Out of the Past if you've never seen it. I mean, I'd be surprised you make it this long. But thank you.
Michael Weber, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI, coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and me, who can submit their nominations for the registry in the form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of every episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration on behalf of You're Missing Out. The only criteria? It must be an American film that's at least 10 years old. Here are today's picks.
So, my pick, pretty easy one for me, to be honest, and it's not really because it ties into the movie, really, in terms of narrative structure, what have you, so much as I just wanted to pick a Kirk Douglas movie. I wanted to pick a Kirk Douglas movie that is playing in this kind of almost sleazy, blue-collar, lower-class kind of milieu, and I mentioned it in the episode. It's Champion. It is the boxing movie he would make after this. It's an amazing movie. I said in the episode, it's proto Raging Bull, and it's closer in tone to Raging Bull than you would think a movie made during the Code could be. Obviously, it's not as dark as that, but it gets closer than you would expect. And Kirk is just out of control good in that movie. He is so fucking good in that movie. And I don't know. I mean, he's one of the icons of cinema. I feel like you need to get as many of his movies in the registry as possible to recognize the greatness he had immediately, and for as long as he was acting. You know, he like we said, he hit hard immediately, and then he just kept doing it for decades. And Champion is one of those first movies that he was a star. He's not second fiddle like he is in this movie. He is the star, and he is just. It's electrifying. It's really just an amazing movie, and I think everybody needs to see it. It's a little more difficult than Out of the Past is to see. It does have a Blu-ray. I'm not sure if it's out of print at this time, but Olive Films put it out. It's a good disc. I would like more people to see it. And no offense to Olive, I would like another company to get a hold of this and maybe do a 4K release and a more widely available disc, because I think everybody needs to see this. Champion is my pick.
Well, I hope we're not being too disrespectful to Jane Greer, leaving her out of this party, because Tom picked a Kirk Douglas film, and I'm going with a Robert Mitchum film. A Robert Mitchum film that I talked about in the episode. I am going with a film that I ended up seeing when I was trying to watch the Palme d'Or winners, actually. And I came away just utterly enamored with this film, which is the other Robert Mitchum film this year that was up for Best Picture, called Crossfire. Crossfire is set amidst a military battalion and deals with an anti-Semitic attack. It is striking how blunt it is about that, and coming out the same year as Gentleman's Agreement, arguably, I think, in some senses, Crossfire might even be the more effective film than Gentleman's Agreement, just because it is a B picture, just because it is so blunt and so direct, and so, kind of lean. Crossfire is a really impressive, really effective picture that really captures the moment. If Gentleman's Agreement focuses on the more white-collar country club side of American anti-Semitism, Crossfire the same year offers the contrast of the murky bar, blue-collar side of anti-Semitism. So Crossfire, an extraordinary film, an extraordinary product of its time that I think still holds up very well today. I think Crossfire should absolutely be in the National Film Registry.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Thank you again to Michael H. Weber for joining us. Tune in next week as we discuss the 1945 documentary The Battle of San Pietro with senior video editor Glenn Garthwaite. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.